Today we're here with Eric Stolberg with Digital One, telling us how he got started.
Okay, so Tiffany, how far back do you want to go? Do you want to know why I'm an audio engineer?
Yes.
Okay, so, and I'll try to be as not long-winded as possible. So when I was in the third grade, I saw a movie called Star Wars, 1977.
Great movie.
Changed a lot of kids' lives, right? Okay, well, I'm one of those. I was fascinated by it and loved it, and a couple years after Star Wars came out, I saw the making of Star Wars, which was could have been on Disney, Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday evenings kind of show, but it showed how Ben Burt made the sounds of lightsabers, how he took guide wires from a telephone line, or a power line actually, and hit it with a crescent wrench, and it made the sounds of lasers, and that inspired me to go, wow, it wasn't just dog barks that they put in the show, but it was this amazing amalgam of sounds to get the sounds that they wanted. The TIE fighters were, elephant roars, that the sand people were donkeys braying, that Chewbacca was a black bear, that kind of stuff. So that inspired me to get into films, and so I think by the time I was in the fifth grade, I made my first stop-motion animation film with Play-Doh. And I didn't even know what Will Vinton Studios was, and at that point, but I built a bunch of spaceships, built all these little characters out of clay, Play-Doh, mechanical robots, and I shot it with a 8mm film-only camera. So not an 8mm video camera, but an 8mm film camera. It was actually Super 8 and had no sound, but it was just the visuals.
Interesting.
And I knew a guy that was a couple years older than me, a high schooler at the time, who had made a film, and so I learned how to edit from him, and so I made this film and sent it off to get developed, and came back, and some shots were out of focus and some shots were blown out and some shots looked really good, but that was my first film. And I've always been into films. I was into all the Star Wars films, and then Indiana Jones, and I loved sci-fi because of the sound, right? But I also loved animation, because when it came to creating sound for animation, there's no location to record. You have to create everything for whatever you see.
Oh,
okay?
Wow.
And to this day, it's one of the things I love about animation is sound comes first. You do sound before you do anything else. True, you build the characters and you write the story and all that kind of stuff, but you record the sound of the characters before you actually animate the characters, okay? Because you have to animate the mouths and the facial expressions and the arms moving and all that kind of stuff to the actual recording.
Oh,
okay?
So you would say sound comes in pre-production rather than post?
It's not even that it's pre-production, but it in many ways is the first part of production, okay? Now, take that with a grain of salt. They'll be building sets and, like I said, building characters. I mean, they'll have all kinds of characters, and if it's stop motion, they'll have 100,000 faces that get swapped out on the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be building that, but then they record the audio, and then they animate to the audio. Okay?
Okay.
Which is very different from most of my job, which is all the visuals are done, and then I come in after the fact and do all the sound and do all the mixing and make it all pretty after the fact. And one of the cool things about animation is you do it ahead of time. You do that first, rather. You do the recording first. how I got into this was, like I said, when I was a kid, I was fascinated by it. I was also a kid that liked technology and liked to tear apart toasters to see how they work. I loved. I played,
And you would record them along the way?
Well, I wouldn't record them, but I was always the person that liked to fiddle with things. Okay, and I think a good sound designer is someone who fiddles and plays with stuff. Doesn't just set up a mic and go record. I was also a drummer. So I learned how to play the drums.
I was just going to ask if you were in a band.
And so, but I was like in the jazz band at school and the marching band and whatnot. And by the time I got into high school, I made the transition to playing in a rock band. And when you're the drummer, they almost always have practice at your house because you got the most stuff, right? And you're the loudest, and your folks are probably okay with you playing at your house, being loud, where other people are like, you can't have the band practice here. So everybody would come to me, and when they would come, then they would leave their equipment. So, the guitarist would leave his amplifiers and his sound mixing board and his synthesizers and his recording equipment and the effects processors, all this technical stuff. And since I was the guy that liked to take things apart, I loved playing with all that gear. And so one thing led to another, that I thought that, well, what would be fun is to be a producer and maybe record bands, but maybe not. Maybe work in film, but maybe not. Maybe work in television. Because film and television, when I got in the industry, for very different camps. And so I went off to college, and while I was in college, I got a music scholarship, so that was great to be able to help pay for college. And while I was in school, a dear friend of mine said, "You need to take television production class because you're really good at all this technology, and you could make anything." And it was funny, and we still laugh about this. We talk about this friend of mine whose name is Tom, and he got me into this class, and I started doing television production, and he was right. It was like right down my alley. Okay, so while I thought music might be a thing, Tiffany, I really was like, I loved the television production. And my professor at the time is somebody who's to this day is still a dear friend. He helped me get a job at Channel 6. He helped me get a job actually at the University of Portland doing some internal marketing for the business school. And
is Channel 6 still coin?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And then he helped me get a internship at a recording studio. So I was working at Channel 6 and working for free at a recording studio. And everybody thought it was really cool that I worked at Channel 6. They thought, oh, that's like the coolest thing, And really what I loved was being at the recording studio that was doing advertising work. And that's how I got started working on stuff for Nike, essentially. Mm-hmm. Okay? And what I fell in love with was that commercials were just 30-second films. They're just really short films. But you have to make them really good for people to watch them.
Absolutely.
So I went from kind of abandoning music, but really loving advertising. And it's through advertising that I rekindled my love for film work. Okay? So the two, advertising and film, are very different worlds, but they use a lot of the same technology, so that you're using equipment for commercial work, but you're working on the commercial for a day. You work on a film, you're working on for 40 days, So it's just the same stuff, just the scope is different, okay? And what I figured out, or what I decided to do, that there was such an amazing creative scene in Portland because of the advertising scene, because of the shoe manufacturers over in the shoe company over in Beaverton that was doing amazing work, that I didn't have to leave to go live in Los Angeles, but I could be here, still make a living, get married, have a family, have a house, enjoy life in the Pacific Northwest, because it's a pretty amazing place, right?
Absolutely.
And but at the same time, be able to work on some film work, not be completely out of the film work. In general, if you really want to work in films, you need to be in Los Angeles. You need to be in Hollywood. Okay? But there's an amazing creative thing going on up here, and animation is part of that. And there are, arguably the best animators in the world are right here in Portland. So I've had the opportunity to not only work on these features for some of the big studios, but also a lot of little independent films. Okay, and I love it and still do, especially with the independent little films, the short animation films, which still take a long time to create. You get to do everything. Okay? When you work on a big feature, you usually get kind of placed into a lane. You're going to do this aspect. Okay? So something like Coraline has multiple teams doing different things. Okay? Mm-hmm. And you've got the recordists, and you've got the dialogue editors, and you got the sound effects editors, and then you got the sound designers, and then you got the composers, and then you got the re-recording mixer that brings all this stuff together. So on films like Coraline and all the Leica features I've worked on, I have only been tapped to work on one aspect of it, and that's the recording of the voices. Whereas numerous independent animated films, I've gotten to do everything, recording the voices, coming up with all the sounds, mixing it, so on and so forth, which is a pretty cool thing to do too.
And do the artists come in and use the studio here and
Sure.
voice it in a mic, or do you?
Well, there's some of that.
Pre-production of the voices.
We do some of that too. It all depends
okay.
on the project. Okay, so I finished a independent feature. Is it a feature? It might be actually short. Maybe only an hour long. That was created by people in the animation world. And it's live action with a bunch of animation inside the live action. And on that show, they had already done all of the sound effects and the voices and whatnot. And then they came to me with basically needing it all to be kind of wrapped together and unified. Okay, so we did more sound design. I had my assistant coming up with all kinds of creative new sounds for the monsters that were all animated in the film. And then I did a ton of noise reduction to make things sound better with the dialogue that was shot almost 6 years ago or 8 years ago. Anyways, so a lot was done outside of recording voices and then mixing it. And then we spent a month mixing it. Off and on.
And that's the average time for a film, is it about a month?
Well, if you say an average time for an animated feature, no, it takes longer. Okay? A non-animated film should take about 4 weeks of production. Okay? But remember, everything has been shot on location. It's getting it, dialogue editing, figuring out what needs to be re-recorded in the dialogue, doing all the backgrounds, ambiences, the hard sound effects, and then getting that mix. And that's usually about a 4-6 week process. A big feature like, I don't know, Indiana Jones, that's kind of an old film, but like, a blockbuster, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, they take a lot longer. Okay.
Gotcha.
Maybe I should use something more from this time. One of these, like an Avengers movie. That takes a long time. Mm-hmm. They got to create a lot of sounds for a lot of creatures that are created with computer generation, right? So, So I can't give you a good number on how long it takes, but that's kind of a, hopefully you can kind of get an idea of
Yes.
in general.
And if you were hiring a future generation person to work alongside you, what kind of tips and homework would you give them before they brought you a resume?
So I'll share with you what my mentor shared with me however many years ago. I don't even want to say. Back in the 90s, okay? Long time ago. So I had the fortune to work with an amazing engineer named Chris Douthit. And Chris, at the very beginning, told me to be in this business, you have to be equal parts technical and equal parts creative. Okay? So someone that's really creative, Tiffany, but can't figure out any technical stuff, whether it's the wiring, whether it's the computer, whether it's whatever, the technical stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I don't care how creative you are. If you can't figure out the technical stuff, you will fail. You just won't be able to. You won't be any good because you'll be stuck. Likewise, if you're really technical and you don't have a creative bone in your body, it doesn't matter what you have in terms of gear. If you can't do something cool with it, with using your noggin, you're going to fail. Okay? So he was trying to tell me, you got to be both. Okay. So don't focus on one or the other. But the truth is, we're all better at one thing than the other, right? We just are. So that's what he told me, and I've added to that. And so back to your question about what do you tell the future. So I think it takes three things to actually be successful. You need to be equal parts creative, equal parts technical, and you have to like people. There are people in this industry that don't like other humans. They just don't like them.
I hear you.
Other humans get in the way. Other humans have opinions. Other people get tired. Other people get cranky. All that kind of stuff. But really, you gotta like the other people, because liking other humans is how creativity flourishes, right? Mm-hmm. It's trusting one another, having the desire to want to collaborate, not just be a solo person in their basement. All right. So to me, those three things work. Okay. And again, if you're really good with people, but you can't do technical and you aren't creative, this is not a good business to be in. You should be what's a good friendly person, like a really good maitre d' of a restaurant. You don't have to be a chef, right? But you should be really good at people, or customer service, or hell, a flight attendant that makes you feel safe and secure and taken care of, right? Mm-hmm. And being an audio engineer and a sound designer or a mixer, you've got to be able to be collaborative. So you got to be creative, and you got to like working with the people that you're working with. And sometimes you're working with really grumpy people.
How often does the software change and evolve? Would you say from the beginning of your career, have you had to modify knowledge of the technology? What kinds of programs would you
So I've
invite them to study?
I've always felt that it isn't about the programs. It's not, it's the old metaphor. It's like, a really bad craftsman blames his tools, right? Well, it's not really about the tools. It's what you did with the tools, that kind of thing. And so to answer your question on a simple form, technology is constantly changing, radically changing. And what I do and what that machine up there can do compared to what it could do 5 years ago, compared to what it could do 15 years ago. I mean, there's huge steps, okay? And AI has changed and impacted that a lot. But the concepts of making a good film or doing the audio properly hasn't changed. Okay, so when I got in the business, I was cutting tape. Okay, so the difference between using a workstation that can do 256 tracks, or it's probably even more. It's more like, 1028. But when I got in the business, 24 tracks was the max. And so, you got so many more tracks. But does that mean you're better with more tracks? Well, not necessarily. But to get back to kind of your question, things have changed a lot, but a lot of the key foundational things are the same. You still have to write well, right? Mm-hmm. Even with all this technology, you still got to have a good idea for the film, or else nobody's going to watch it.
So, like CGI and effects use, say, Blender and Autodesk. What type of sound software are you using to this day?
So there's lots of tools out there, but the clear and heads above everybody else industry standard for doing audio is called Pro Tools. It's made by Avid. And Pro Tools, I got started on Pro Tools. 1991 was when it first came out, and it was terrible. Okay, and but it has matured over the years. And why is it the industry standard? Well, simply, it was the industry standard because it was a tenth of the cost of its competitors at the time. So, to have a workstation that maybe had 8 tracks, you would spend $80,000 to $100,000 for that device, okay? Mm-hmm. And Pro Tools, when it came out, you had to buy a Macintosh, but Pro Tools was about $10,000. And that was a drop in the bucket. So this company, when we got started, we bought a $100,000 workstation to show people that we were serious, but then I went and bought 3 Pro Tools systems and still didn't even come close to the price of the one Pro system.
Interesting.
And we did have clients that are no longer in the business say to me things like, Pro Tools, that's a toy, because it felt like a toy to them. But Pro Tools, because of its price point, was in the hands of everyone. And so it became the industry standard because everyone knew how to use it, because they could afford it. And so, ironically, Pro Tools still costs about the same amount, but what it can do now compared to what it did before is, I won't say night and day, but it's a big difference. Okay, and so I use Pro Tools. I use a number of little tools, but I think one of the ways to define it is Pro Tools is kind of like the heart or the cornerstone, mm-hmm. right? It's the base, home base. And so we use all kinds of other plugins and pieces of software with Pro Tools in combination. I have a sound effects server called Sound Miner that allows me to search for a dog bark or a plane by or a car tire squeal or whatnot. But that sound then gets put into Pro Tools. So think of Pro Tools as everything comes together in Pro Tools. Okay?
Like an archive, a database?
It's not the archive. It is the heart of the system.
Okay.
Okay? And so you may have the sound effect server, like I said, where I can search for things, but ultimately that sound doesn't do any good unless it gets put into Pro Tools and is sunk to the picture and then is EQ'd with Pro Tools and the volumes are adjusted with Pro Tools, and then it goes out to the speakers in here, and Pro Tools is the heart. Okay, and there's tons of great programs out there like Ableton, and Logic is one of my favorites, but they're all kind of like different tools that you use to really get the film to work the way you want it to. We used a lot of noise reduction type software nowadays that allows us to salvage audio that might not have been 10 years ago, that you had to go, we're going to have to record it because a bus went by while they were recording, let's say, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, well, I can actually draw the bus out and I can get rid of it and keep the dialogue. Okay? So Pro Tools in this facility, We have 5 Pro Tools workstations, so I can have 5 people working on a project at the same time. And that's unique in this day and age where a lot of people are working out of their basements. So a facility like this can have multiple people going and team up.
And for a younger audience, would they need to be a music major? Would they need to be TV production, journalism?
It really depends, because I think it depends on how creative they are. Okay, so I came from a music front, but like I told you, my story was like, okay, no, I really want to do this. So I started film, went to music, and went back to film. And when I'm looking to hire people, if they came from a music background, I don't think that's terrible. But I want them to be focused on film or advertising, short form film. Mm-hmm. Now, okay?
Okay.
And so that's an important thing. And I think one thing to point out that, I don't know if this is a value for the exhibit, but Pro Tools is such an important tool that I don't hire anybody anymore that doesn't have a certification in Pro Tools. Okay?
That's great to know.
Because we, in the past, have hired people that weren't certified, and they struggled, Tiffany.
Okay.
And anybody can learn anything, but when you come to a facility like this, you actually need to be able to get working right away. This is not a school for learning how to run the tools. That's what University of Oregon, UP, George Fox are for. Mm-hmm. PSU's got a great program for that. By the time they get here, you better know that tool so you can actually be valuable.
Do they have certification programs through Pro Tools?
Yes, through Avid.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all across the nation, all across the globe, actually. And a lot of people can take the certification remotely, and then do the tests and all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to be in Los Angeles to take it, and so that's a popular thing for people that aren't in New York, Chicago, LA.
Super helpful to know.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, thank you for your time today, and look forward to having you on our wall at the Lake Oswego Festival of the Arts this June 20th through the 22nd. Eric, I'm going to have you explain, as we have our exhibit with pre-production, development, production, and post-production, what elements, when you are working on films such as Paranorman and Wendell and Wild that you've worked on in the past, what elements would you describe for the audience?
Sure. So I tried to jot this down, and I'll say what the list is here, but there are also subsets to every one of these, okay? Mm-hmm. But you have what's called the voiceover, okay? So voiceover would be the voice that isn't necessarily sunk to picture. It might be a narrator telling the story. Okay. That's considered voiceover. And then DX, which is also known as dialogue or dial, is the actual, you see somebody talking and their mouth is moving and you hear them, that is dialogue. Okay? So on a regular film, you would set up a camera and you'd shoot somebody talking, and that would be dialogue. With animation, we record that dialogue first, and then they animate the puppets to that dialogue. But it's considered a separate element. Okay. Then you have sound effects, and sound effects can be anything from a dog barking to a door slamming, and those are known as hard effects, to sound design, which could be a drone in the background or
a symphony.
Some kind of, well, maybe not a symphony, but some kind of dramatic sound design that makes you feel a certain way, okay? But that usually gets put into the FX tracks or the SFX tracks. And then we have another thing that are called BGs, backgrounds. So that's all the birds chirping and the clock ticking in the background that isn't really a hard sound effect, but it adds to the ambiance, okay? So the BGs. and then you have the music, the MX, okay? So right there, that's just 5 things that all got to get mixed down into the, to the final mix, which could be stereo, could be 5.1, 7.1, 7.14, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that means just the speakers, okay?
Oh, okay.
So,
for surround sound for a film.
Like, for instance, 5.1 is a surround. They are also, there's so many different flavors here. I am really paring it down. But 5.1 is kind of what you would hear on a digital broadcast on your television. So when you're watching Hulu, and if you have a 5.1 system, you would hear that. Okay. And a really nice system might be 7.1, and then 7.1.4 is Atmos. Okay, so you got the speakers up in the ceiling as well, and that's what you're hearing in really good theaters like an IMAX theater or
with
Adobe.
Front and back speakers.
Oh yeah. So this is the 7 equals. If you look in this room, you got right in the middle. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and then the 0.1 is up in the front is a subwoofer. Okay, so that's what 0.1 stands for. It only makes low frequencies. And then the 4 are the ceiling speakers, or what they call the top speakers. Okay, so this room has 12 speakers. Okay, and they make bigger ones. They make 9 tube 6s and all kinds of stuff. You can go to a really fancy theater.
And that's needed to pinpoint direction in your movies when you're building those files to make the sound.
Yes, but really what it's for is to feel immersive. The more speakers, the more you're feeling like you're in, because in the real world, right, sound is coming from everywhere. Mm-hmm. The airplane going by, the truck going over here, the river over here, the leaves from the trees next to you. It's coming from everywhere. And we as humans are just kind of used to that we actually have an amazing ability to know where things are from just using these 2 devices, right? We can tell something's actually behind us. Whereas with our eyes, we actually have to be looking to know where it's coming from. But our ears can tell us where things are in a 3-dimensional space. So really good cinema has more immersive audio to make it almost like the reason that they have a bigger screen and that it has higher fidelity, right? Mm-hmm. That it's more pixels just makes it more realistic. And that's one way you could describe why you have multiple speakers.
I see. Okay. So when you as a sound engineer, you're working with all of these 5
or more. Yes.
And you're making the final mix, which comes to the post-production.
It's the end of the post-production process, actually. Okay. And the only thing that really comes after this is distribution. Putting it on a DVD or a Blu-ray or a DCP or uploading it to a streaming service or whatnot. Okay? Getting it out to everyone. This is pretty much the last thing. Sometimes there are other steps like closed captioning, or putting the text on the bottom or some color, or sometimes they'll even do a final mix and they might not have all the effects done, visual effects. There still may be things that the computer guys are working on.
And does your studio provide closed captioning, or is that not part of the contract?
That's not what we do.
Okay.
Yeah. There's other people that focus on that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate the description, and look for Eric as a featured artist at our Lake Oswego Festival, June 20th through 22nd.